right, good morning. How's everybody doing? Good? Cool. Well, for the last 10 years, we have done this vision and prayer breakfast, except this year, obviously, there's no breakfast. So you've lost the best part of this service. For 10 years, we had breakfast. And the first year, it was me cooking pancakes. And I do make some good pancakes, but it was about 20 of us, Kale, was that about right? In the 7th floor in that little conference room, making pancakes, hanging out, doing the... So this service has evolved greatly over the last 10 years, and it's moved from breakfast. We would have done breakfast, love doing breakfast, but obviously with COVID, you're like, well, are we going to have a buffet? Who goes to buffets anymore, right? We're not doing that. So we would have loved to have had breakfast, but nonetheless, this Visions prayer service has been really great and fun for us the last 10 years to review what God has done the last year and then to look forward to what we see God doing in the future. And so we're glad you're here. If it's your first time, we've had a lot of new first-timers that have come on these days and ended up really loving our church. But it's a very weird Sunday for you to be your first time here. So anyways, glad you're here. Our 10th annual Vision and Prayer service. No breakfast this year, but you're welcome to get breakfast afterwards. So that's the plan. We'd like to walk through some slides. I hope this isn't as technical. I hope this is more spirit-filled and focused on what is God doing. Not necessarily what are we doing, but what is God doing? What are we waiting for? So to start, I really do want to emphasize the urgency we have this year to listen to the voice of God. I don't want to overstate it. I generally talk in lots of hyperboles all the time. But I don't want to overstate it, but I do think there is an urgency to consider what is God doing here? And are we listening to the voice of God? In Acts 1, the early church, we're going to read this in a little bit. The early church in Acts chapter 1 had just witnessed the resurrection of Jesus. They just witnessed someone that was dead, their friend, raised to life. And you would think that the early church would have gone nuts about this. Their friend is with them. And Jesus tells them, wait here. He doesn't say go make disciples. He doesn't say go start schools. He doesn't say go build businesses. He says wait in the city. Listen and wait because something's coming, and that's the Holy Spirit. And my fear for the American church and the modern church is that we've spent significant time doing, significant time creating and building and managing and architecting, and very little time waiting and listening, receiving, praying, right? We talk about prayer sermons, and I can guarantee you if the word prayer is in the sermon title of the email, it's like 50% of the people were like, that's okay. That's not enough. I need some more than that, right? But prayer and waiting for God will be our posture this year. I think it's easy for us to want to tell God what we want to do. I'm going to go to this school. I'm going to get this education. I'm going to get this job. I'm going to marry this person. This is my plan. And as we read the Proverbs, we see that we can make lots of plans, but only the Lord will determine the course. And so this year, and especially these next 5 weeks, our plan and our hope is not to tell God what we're doing. It's to listen and to receive what God wants for us. And so there's an urgency in this. My optimistic self says this is a midpoint in our discipleship plan that we've been doing the last 2 years. My realistic self says this is probably more of a crossroads than a midpoint. And so maybe that's not quite pessimistic, but it's more of a, what are we doing here, this midpoint? Some of the questions I wrote to get us thinking in this vein of What type of church will we be? What type of people will we be are these? Do we see evidence of spiritual power at work in our lives? Spiritual power. And this doesn't mean that we manufacture some emotional experience and people, yah, 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 rahoo. It means, does the Spirit of God powerfully work in us and through us? Are spiritual disciplines common among our people? Common spiritual disciplines of prayer and reading and fasting and silence and solitude and mission and service and worship. Are the spiritual disciplines regular rhythms of our lifestyle? Where do we see the fruit of the Spirit at work in us? Galatians 5. Do we possess a missional fervor for the city that Jesus is saving and redeeming and making things new around us? Is our church leadership vibrant and healthy, from elders, pastors, to deacons, directors, to volunteers, to members? Are we healthy? Are we vibrant? Are we reflecting Jesus? Are we showing our city Jesus in our leadership? Do we show strong discipleship? Discipleship means people that are learning the way of Jesus. Are people learning the way of Jesus and then able to teach others the way of Jesus, who will teach others the way of Jesus? The discipleship is I hate to say multi-level marketing, but it's the multiplication of God's church as people learn and follow Jesus and know this is good. Other people should do this with me that will help other people grow in their faith with Jesus. That's discipleship at its core. Turn the engine of our church. So maybe those are some questions, right? Those are hard questions. Many of you are like, man, I need a nap, right? That's tough, right? Hard questions to answer, but one that we want to do is ask God these questions, because these are great questions to ask, and the Lord has a plan for us, and we want to be faithful to follow through with it. So in that sense, let's go ahead and jump into some of the more nuts and bolts of our vision and prayer service. So Sula, go ahead and hit that next slide. We started this discipleship plan as a church 2 years ago. And in my opinion, the discipleship plan that we had created is rare and awesome. And I think it's really cool. I don't think many churches have considered the long-term effect of how you teach and how you develop people over 4 years. Maybe we think about a month or 2 months or a Bible study, but like a long-term holistic development of people across 4 years. I mean, I look at my kids, and Google often reminds me of my photos this time 4 years ago, and you're like, oh my gosh, look at those children. They are just little sweet little faces, right? You remember those years. And I wonder, when we started this, we had a great hope that 4 years would bring significant change into people's lives, and I think it has. And so we started this discipleship plan with 12 modules, 4 years, 12 modules, 3 modules a year, which focuses on one area, or kind of focus one development area of our lives. And so our vision as a church, we started with, was we want to be a church that shows our city Jesus. In 30 years, if we are to be successful, if we are to be vibrant, our city would see Jesus through our church, through our people, through our services, through our actions. The city sees and worships Jesus. That's success. That's our vision. Now, the vision of our discipleship plan was this. Well, if we want to show our city Jesus, well, then we need our church to reflect the beauty and power of Jesus. So we need a church of fully alive Jesus followers who are using their gifts, sacrificing their lives for others, and who are equipped and confident to serve in a church planting team if called. This means either they would become healthy members, and you would be a thriving, healthy member and disciple of the church, or you would say, hey, this church is great, but I love East Charlotte, I love West Charlotte, I love China. You would consider Where could I go in South Africa to plant a church, to bring the gospel to bear? And our hope was maybe not just to amass Christians as a church plant, but to train and fortify and develop people as followers of Jesus that would then go with leadership and power and the Spirit to bring the gospel wherever they would go. So that's the discipleship plan overview. We wanted to see 4 areas of development. Those 4 areas, most of you probably think of character development. But we wanted to develop across theology, across a consideration of church family and unity, of outward engagement, mission, service, and character development, and soul care. And then the plan was to push it out through discipleship pods, which are our small groups. These are small groups that have a facilitator or leader, and the men's and women's ministry connect with them and try to build places of engagement, of spiritual encouragement. So that was our plan. And then those pods had I wouldn't say a tiered level, but you could take a book, or you could take part of it and do it, or you could go nuts and you could spend a ton of time deep diving in each module. And so in December 2019 and to January 2020, we launched this discipleship plan. We were gung-ho about it, and in March of 2020, the virus that we will not be named any longer. And so even in the virus, we thought we had great hopes to see this real discipleship plan really grab in. People had free time. People had capacity to engage. And we thought, okay, this will still be good. And I think it was helpful in many areas. And so that was our discipleship plan overview. Vision of a church showing our city Jesus, becoming these types of people who are starting movements and building churches and being healthy members. So overview of all of our modules. If you've forgotten, here's our 6 modules we've done in 2 years. Disciples, we are disciples who practice spiritual disciplines. We are missionaries who know and share the gospel. We are church members who love the church and love the way of Jesus in the church and the body. We are saints who are learning full spiritual and emotional health. It's a holistic process. We are citizens who live in our city with godliness and missional purpose and wisdom. And we are theologians. That's been our most recent module, where we've used our doctrinal statement and New City Catechism to help shape our theological understanding, our anchor of understanding the gospel. And if you've done those with us, if you've been here for 2 years, here's all the books that we have read or the opportunities you've had. We've worked on Praying Life by Paul Miller. It's an incredible book on prayer. We did a big Zoom call with it. We gave that book to every member, or every staff member of the YMCA, and we were going to host an event, and then obviously March happened, so we didn't do that. We did The Unbelievable Gospel. It's a great book on evangelism and what is the gospel. We did Life Together by Bonhoeffer. We did the book Heaven. We did the New City Catechism. And so all of those were books that we read, but also context, learning prayer, learning about heaven, learning about where are we going, and is it worth going that way? What do we believe about theology and the understanding of how doctrine shapes our practical worldview and how we live? And so I wanted to put all 6 of those over the last 2 years as we're in this midpoint, this crossroads, this consideration of what God's doing to remember. Now, in most years, is that my last slide, Sula? Yep, okay. As we're in this place where we would be giving you our next 3 modules, we'd be going 7, 8, 9 and rolling through. We were going to do prayer, we're going to do worship, we're going to do some other things. It just wasn't right to keep pressing in. It was a place we got a couple of months ago as pastors, and we'll share more, and Brandon's going to share more, that some of these modules were maybe us trying to put on what we thought God wanted to do. And so to start the year, our hope is not to say, we're going to learn this, we're going to figure this out, we're going to go after this. Our hope is to listen, and our hope is to pray, And our hope is to hear and to be the people that are in Acts 1 that are waiting to say, what does God want for us? What does God want for us individually? What does God want for us as a church? What does God want for our city? And are we aligned with what God wants? Psalm 127 says, unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. And so we could build a great house. I mean, look, this is a beautiful sanctuary. But unless God builds the house, unless God is the architect and the general contractor, we will build in vain. And so our hope over the next 5 weeks is to put attention to what does God want for us? What does God want for us? And what is spiritual thriving for our church? Brandon's going to share more about this across some of the more metric-y things like finances and people and leaders. And I'll speak to that again at the end. But I wanted to just give you a picture of kind of the overview the last 2 years, where we've been and where we'd like to go. So that's the start, and I'll turn it to Brandon to, what's up? Oh yeah, that's my next one. Okay, yeah, I got sermons. I do that. That's what I do. I do the preaching. Really off to a bang this year. There's one before the sermons. Oh, am I doing that one too? No, good. I was like, I thought I had more on here. Okay, so we have 58 members. That's kind of been a number that's kind of been declining over the last 2 years. So after COVID started, we were in the 70s, have kind of been declining numbers-wise. We did 5 service projects. We did a YMCA member cheat night. We did some toys this Christmas for a church down the road, and Gretchen organized some toys and pies, a bunch of pies for them as well for a Thanksgiving meal. We did a Thanksgiving meal for the Y staff this year. We did 6 Discipleship Plan modules over the last 2 years, 3 this year. We have 3 community groups with lovely community group leaders and 13 discipleship pods, 6 women, 7 men's. We have 25 kids in our new kids program, and yes, that is right. We have an incredible number of kids, and Kathy has been a great leader. She loves Jesus and loves our families and has done a great job over the last couple of months. She just came on recently as our part-time kids ministry director. Mel was here before, and she was wonderful as well. But Kathy's jumped in and been really great. We have 4 babies born, and just recently, about 6 weeks ago, we moved into our new church office, which is directly above us that way, 2 floors, which is pretty cool. So we're excited to be here in the Dowd Y. So that is our 2021 by the numbers. And then here's the sermon series. Remember, we started the year with the good life and what it means to cultivate spiritual fruit. We did hard questions into Easter. We did the book of Ezra, which is after Nehemiah. We did a series on church planting in the summer. And then we did a series on the book of heaven. And that was great. I love that. Billy suggested that. And I thought it was a great idea to talk through what does heaven look like, and are we excited about it? And then we finished with the Gospel of Mark in mighty humility, and then did that Advent series. I did preach like 19 weeks in a row at the end of last year, and that was not very smart, so I have decided not to do that again. And so we are likely, the next 4 weeks, we've got some of our advising elders and other pastors that are coming to preach, so I can take a couple weeks off, not from work, but from preaching. So I'll be here hanging out. But I'm happy to have some advising elders and some support and care that we brought in. So those were our sermon series. I thought we had a good Old Testament, New Testament mix and engaging. One of the coolest, one of the best memories I have of this year, and almost one of the best memories I've had in all of our church the last 10 years, is our Easter service we did on the rooftop. And many of you remember that. And I just remember just such an evidence of the church gathered and delighting in Jesus. And there was testimony, there was music, there was just gospel teaching, but it was a real delight. I mean, I remember people coming forward and just speaking. I want to say, this is what God has done for me, and this is the goodness of the resurrection for me. It was amazing. So that was pretty cool. That was the end of our Hard Question series, and really, really cool. So one of those memories I have just burned into my mind of just joy in worship, and that was pretty cool. So those are our sermon series, and that is the end of my thing. I'll invite Brandon up.
My daughter handed me my big Bible to bring up today, just to let y'all know. Before we get into finances, although this slide probably will grab your attention, I'm glad y'all are here. It's obviously a smaller crowd, the rain, start of the new year. But if you're here, it's because the Lord's drawn you here, and your faithfulness to be attentive to the body and to be present at church is known by God, and He's pleased with you. And I want to mention that we are a body that continues to gather faithfully, no matter what season of life our country is in, no matter what season of life we are in individually. We gather because He causes us to gather, and because He intends for us as a church body to move forward. So just wanted to call that out, whether you're new or you've been here for 10 years. So getting into, make sure I don't have feedback, getting into the finances, you can see a couple things right here. First off, we will get our end-of-year report from the organization, the bookkeeper that we have called Finch. They've been extremely helpful for us keeping track of finances. We made that switch a little while back from a local bookkeeper to one that handles for a number of churches, and they give us an end-of-year report with all the complete finances in the next week and a half. And so once we have that, we will get you all a much more detailed look. This is a very quick snapshot to give you an understanding of what we have so far. And so you look at 2021 income and expenses. You don't have to be a finance major to see that there is about a $97,000 deficit from what the expenses are to what the tithes and offerings has been. This is not abnormal for what a lot of churches are going through right now. And I think everybody can understand that. There's nothing to be sugar-coated right here. You know, it's always meant to be that we would be a church that we would have about 6 months worth of runway, if you want to call that, of just, hey, we have these 6 months is in the bank to make sure that our paid staff can have their things covered, that we have rent to be in the next couple places. If something were to fall out, we have a little bit of extra cash. Otherwise, we are pushing it out. John Piper, I always love the statement, we're not to be a cul-de-sac of blessings, but a through street. Like, we're not to hold on to things. And so it's always going to be, hopefully teetering. But in this case, because of the pandemic, because of church attendance, as you can see right now, we were about 70 members, we're about 58 members, not including children. Those finances begin to dwindle a little bit. And because of the fortunateness that we have to be in the YMCA, we don't own a building. We have a lot less overhead outside of personnel. And so we're able to focus on the personnel expenses. And with the change in office space that Sean mentioned as well, we'll see some savings there. So just to kind of call that out real quick, you see the breakdown for the different categories. I did want to mention this. So we have, currently we have one full-time staff member, which is Pastor Sean. I myself am a lay elder. I work for Coca-Cola, so I do this outside of 9 to 5, or oftentimes maybe I'll sneak in the 9 to 5 and do some church work. Otherwise, we have a handful of part-time staff members. We have Kathy, who Sean mentioned, who recently took over the kids ministry. She's part-time. We have Alyssa, who's been a big help and our longest tenured staff member outside of Sean, who does our marketing and communications. She's part-time. We have Billy, who this past year was full-time, director of operations and also an elder as well. He stepped back to pursue a new opportunity in firefighting, which is amazing. He's serving our city in that way, but he's retained a position for now, part-time, to help us with a number of tasks that he did previously. And then lastly, we also have Stephen Wagner, and I'll get to him in a second, but he is on a contract basis. He is one of the advising elders that's come on board just to help guide us through the season, as Sean's been mentioning, and I'll get to more. He's there. So those are the people that we're paying right now as we have personnel expenses. And then we continue to give away money. We have a certain amount of money that we give away to the Acts 29 network, if you're familiar with that network. It's a network that makes disciples so that we can plant churches, and we continue to plant churches. And so we continue to support churches here, near, and far, here in the States, and some missionaries overseas, and we'll continue to do that. There's, from the top of our tithes and offerings, we give this money away, and we want to be able to do that well and faithfully. And you see administration and facilities, ministry costs. Those are the ways that we serve both internally and externally. So as I mentioned, I don't want to spend way too much time on this and bore you with numbers, but these are very important to us, and it's important to call out what that deficit looks like. We do have money in the bank to continue to go forward, but we continue to ask you to, as members, when you signed on, to continue to give regularly, faithfully, cheerfully, sacrificially. We don't necessarily hold to a standard of you have to give this certain amount of your income to redemption, but we do ask that you participate in sacrificially giving so we can continue to operate. So there's that. Expect in the next couple weeks a more full report, and then at all times we welcome questions, ideas, thoughts as to church finances. We did have a finance director over, and we're right now, that's another thing that we're having the advisory council of elders. They're helping us, review the finances and go through just kind of how are we continuing to be good stewards of these. So there's that slide. Move on to the next one, and I got my notes right here. So we have directors in 2021, communications, Alyssa, as we mentioned, she's part-time staff. You can see a lot of beautiful faces up here. I won't go through them all. But greeting and setup, Jamie, she's meant for that. She is fantastic at that. Kids, Kathy, as we mentioned, she came on board. We did have Melissa Hayward. She did it for the first part of the year. And as we've experienced, and I know many of you, if I'm familiar with your life as you are with mine, this past year has been a lot. A lot of people are challenged with just exhaustion. And so to speak honestly, as we go through some of these, we have some who are in these positions and have been for a while, and then we've had some turnover, and a lot of that has to do with just the weight of responsibility a lot of people are carrying. We're a church that's growing fast in terms of our children, so there's a lot of young families, and there's a lot of people who have full-time jobs, households, and church responsibilities that they're balancing. And so you'll see a lot of these people are doing a fantastic job, and they're balancing a lot of other things, but we have had turnover in some of these positions, and part of it is just, the health of our body, and we want to be attentive to that. We want to thrive, but we don't want to ignore when people are overloaded, overwhelmed with the responsibility of a heavy task of helping a church operate. Production. David Sula is now leading production. He came on board, and the Secklers, who had their wonderful baby boy Shep not long ago, they stepped down. Worship is Hannah and Sam. They've been doing that for a while, and they're fantastic. Women's ministry is Jess Argetsinger, and she has been doing a fantastic job continuing to, not just for the women's side, but also for the entire church, just helping us understand what does it mean to disciple, to educate, to build up leaders within the church. And then the men's ministry, they have a collective of Ethan, Tyler, Alex, and Quentin all together, and they've been doing some fantastic events, drawing men together and creating fellowship and discussing topics about biblical manhood is one we did recently. So these are our directors as we go into the next year too. Okay, so we mentioned this. This is very, very important. As Billy stepped down, our church has a desire to have about 5 elders right now. And I say about. We would like to have 5 elders. We want to be a church that develops men and women as leaders. In our doctrinal statement, men there are certain men who feel a calling to come into eldership, and we want to develop them so that we can continue to build that up. As Billy stepped down, we know that there's one or two that are raising their hand saying, hey, I'm interested in eldership. We want to do this rightly. And so we have reached out initially with the idea of building up our eldership. And we have these three gentlemen who have vast experience building churches, doing church plants, leading, not just locally, but nationally. Stephen Wagner is who I mentioned. He's on contract with us right now. He's going to be here more often. He was going to be here today. And as many of you all may have seen that crazy meme, I'm going to mention social media. Sean sends me TikToks all the time now. But it has that like Mario, he's going through the impossible level, like avoiding COVID apparently. What I'm trying to get at is Stephen has 3 kids and all 3 have COVID right now. And so we advised him to stay back home, and he's going to join us in the future. But he's going to start helping with preaching as well as the advising aspect. We have Pastor Dwayne Bond. He's in Matthews as a pastor. He's also a leader within the Acts 29 network. He is, you talk about a spiritual counselor and pastor. He is fantastic for that. All these men have already been ingrained in the goings of redemption, but now they're in an official position. And then lastly is Pastor Jim, and he was pastor at Church at Charlotte, which recently merged with New City. Is that right? I'm getting names mixed up. New Charlotte, thank you. New Charlotte and Church at Charlotte merged together, and they had this baby child church called New City Church. And he stepped down from that, and he and his wife do a ministry together now. Fantastic, godly men. They are helping us, guiding through this, particularly these next 5 weeks, as Sean mentioned. We want to do this rightly. We want to be surrounded by wisdom and experience, and these are the men to be doing that. So here we go, the prayer aspect. We have these leadership principles as a church. It's in the membership packet when you come on board, and you understand that one of the things we value heavily is that we are a praying church. And you can tell a church's health by the way that it prays or that it lacks to pray. And so alongside the advising elder council, Sean and I and other leaders, a handful of others, including Kaylee, and my wife Brittany, who's with my daughter out there, have discussed, let's enter into this year in a prayerful mode. You cannot go wrong when you start off with prayer. And I'm not talking superficial prayer. I'm talking about positioning ourselves individually and collectively before the Lord and listening. And so we want to do that now. We want to pause, all the other kind of expectations and programs outside of community groups and pods and Sunday gathering. Outside of those, we want to just be a praying church. Sean mentioned Acts chapter 1 and how the body of Christ was told at the beginning, stay still, wait, and pray, and then you will receive instructions. And so this is what we're doing. It says listen is the first aspect. Stephen Wagner, he's fantastic. If you are a director or a leader, he's going to be reaching out to you and sitting down with you to kind of get your ideas also. What do you envision for redemption? What does it mean to serve the city and to show our city Jesus? And so expect that. He's also, there's a likelihood that, we'll be connecting with community groups and everything else, but we want to listen both to the Lord and to one another as to what is good. What do we need to be doing? Next is pray. And we're asking, again, you to do this individually and collectively. This isn't a lighthearted request. This is a please lean in. And we believe, I was reading something from a devotional recently talking about Luke chapter 11 and Mark 6, I believe. And both of those prospective chapters is the Lord's Prayer. And the disciples say, Lord, teach us how we should pray. And he teaches them the Lord's Prayer, but in both aspects, he kind of sandwiches it with a side story. And one of them, he talks about if you're a decent parent and your child asks you for a fish, you're not going to give him a snake. how much greater your Father in heaven, who knows already what you're going to ask for. We believe that as we pray, the Lord will be attentive to these requests. And so we're asking you individually, daily, for the next 5 weeks to pray this prayer, asking the Lord what his desire is for redemption, how we can be a thriving congregation, but then also collectively, because it would not be fair if we were just a church that says, do this on your own, and then that's kind of it. We want you in your community groups and in your pods. If you're not familiar with pods are where we have three or so men or women, and you meet on a regular basis for more intimate discipleship, for accountability, for prayer. The community groups are about 12 wide. And so we're asking you in those settings, and then on each Sunday gathering, we're going to be praying this. And we're doing so with great expectation that the Lord will reveal to us and to the advising council and to each of us in unity what's next. And that is the last part, the ask. What does God want for this body? What would be thriving? I don't know about you, but it's easy to get into such a routine that we forget what God desires for us to be overflowing. That doesn't mean life is easy. That doesn't mean that there's comfort and security. It just means, as Sean mentioned before, that we are thriving as a spiritual body as Christ desired the church. And remember, in Acts chapter 1, and then getting into the rest of Acts, the church experienced a lot of challenge. I mean, true, deep challenge. So it's not that we won't be challenged. We are acknowledging the challenge before us. But we're saying, Lord, what do you want for us so that we are thriving, so that we are being built up in the Spirit, that we are growing in the Word, that we are pouring out into others? And we want to know as a body, what can we be doing? We've tried a number of different things, and COVID in itself is a challenge, but then we have a lot of other aspects. We have, as I mentioned, a lot of families that have a lot going on right now, a lot of little ones under the age of 5. Maybe you're buying a new home, you're traveling a lot with work. We just have an interesting congregation. How can we be connected? What's the identity you want us to have as we serve? And so that is the question that we're asking. It's just, Lord, what do you deserve from me individually and for us collectively to thrive as a church body? It is not worth doing this if we're going to do this mediocre or with a lukewarm faith. We want to be pressing in. We want the enemy to be afraid. We want to see wild things happening in this city because we are trusting in, we are growing in Jesus Christ. And so we acknowledge that there's some challenges that we're facing with COVID, along with the universal church. This is both specific to us, but it's also general to the church in America and in the world right now. A lot of challenge. So how can we be attentive to that? What is the Lord desiring for us to hear? So right now, before we go next, I'm going to leave about 3, maybe 5 minutes of silence. And I desire for us individually, and then we'll pray collectively, for you to go before the Lord and to go to him with expectation, to go to him with humility and with zeal, to go to him with a yearning to hear, Lord, what are your plans for me as an individual, for us as a body? And so spend this next time in prayer, and then after that, Pastor Sean and myself will spend some time in collective prayer over the body, and we'll move forward from there. But spend this time between you and Jesus, hearing, listening, sharing with the Lord. So let's pray.